this book is not for you.
House of Leaves is a horror novel by Mark Danielewski about the pursuit of art. In it, an author chronicles an author chronicling a documentarian who finds out his house measures a quarter inch longer on the inside than the outside. Will Navidson, the documentarian, later finds the door that should lead outside instead opens to a hallway. Deep, dark, and constantly changing. Navidson documents the hallway in hopes to create a project, slowly destroying his relationships, sanity, and health in the process. The book is formatted in a way that is deliberately slow and difficult to read, some pages being nearly indecipherable and others full of information that I regret reading. At 709 massive pages, the book practically requires a base camp and extra rations to get through. I read hundreds of pages a day working through House of Leaves. It consumed my entire reality just as it did the characters within. This effect, the story of an artist consumed with trauma, pressure, and raw talent told in an impossible-to-breach format, has only been encapsulated in a series of records that just might be the strangest 3-album run of all time. This is the story of Lil Ugly Mane and the Three-Sided Tape.
No, it's 2007. No, it's 2007, man.
Born in Richmond, Virginia, Travis Miller, pka Lil Ugly Mane, unknowingly started making the Three-Sided Tape project when he was 15 in 1999. By 2010, Miller started releasing southern rap tracks on Bandcamp, this effort culminating in the underbaked mixtape Play As Circle and the massively influential Mista Thug Isolation. Play As Circle is a slow, gross mess of a record. The beats are tinny with 808 hi-hats EQ'd to take out everything but the most ear-bothering highs. Miller's vocals are annoyingly pitched down, even more than in Mista Thug Isolation, and the bars are overly crass even for this era of Lil Ugly Mane standards. For those of you who haven't heard it before, Mista Thug, released in 2012, was a marvel in the Memphis revival sound, with heavy influence from 90s projects like 3-6 and Project Pat, combined with the goofiness and stylistic choices of the internet at the time. Looping jazz samples, overblown boom-bap drums, and eerie vocals fill the record. Miller rocked a fake deep voice and fake macho personality with crass and over-the-top bars. The project featured Supa Sorta Human and Denzel Curry, who both contributed beautiful pieces. Despite the relatively formulaic concept, Miller made sure to spice up the formula so that the record was little more than your classic internet horrorcore. The album opens with the track Mista Thug Isolation, 12th movement, a 2-minute and 48-second noise cut into serious shit. A banger if you ever heard one from Travis Miller. Other notable cuts are the funny, if not extremely misogynistic Slick Rick, the inspirational, I guess, Breeze 'Em Out, and the sorta sexy Mona Lisa Overdrive. The production is inventive, if not overly silly at times. The writing is amusing, though it often feels trite. And the formatting is so smooth and easy to listen to after you get past the noise cut at the beginning. Many tracks in the record handle Miller's later themes, with some of his swag-ridden tracks having a twinge of depression and paranoia. In the best track on the record, Bitch I'm Lugubrious, Miller uses his lyricism to disguise his depression under $5 words and a catchy rhythm. Mista Thug received a fair bit of traction and acclaim, especially as it ages and we just see how influential it is as a defining record in the internet sound. It's fair to say that Mista Thug Isolation, alongside classics like Death Grips' The Money Store and Devin Hendrix' now JPEG Mafia's Ghost Pop tape, have shaped a generation of online contrarians and experimental hip-hop musicians. Some of the cuts on the record are classic cloud rap, and no doubt, alongside Miller's On Doing an Evil Deed blues, helped form the genre into the powerhouse it is today. After the bombshell that was Mista Thug Isolation, Miller stayed out of the limelight. Andy O'Connor of Pitchfork talks about Miller's actions after the fact, writing, "Despite the underground hype bolstered by an Earl Sweatshirt cosign, he didn't really use it to advance himself, never being into touring or pursuing bigger features." Miller quickly grew disillusioned by the rap game and the idea of hip-hop not being exclusively an artistic output. Just over a year after Mista Thug Isolation, Travis Miller released the aforementioned On Doing an Evil Deed blues, where he rails against a predatory industry and recalls when he used to enjoy writing. As the track ends, he effectively announces the end of Lil Ugly Mane. Travis Miller has always been an extremely prolific producer. I read somewhere once, but can't find anything about it, that he went through a 40 or 50 day period in which he made an album a day consisting of noise to hip-hop to a prank call we'll hear later on. Earlier in the month, Miller released the first of a series that supposedly was recovered off of his broken laptop. The Three-Sided Tape is a collection of hundreds of tracks, released over half a decade in 3 parts, starting with the Three-Sided Tape Volume 1. This massive 32-track, hour-long record is just the introduction to the saga.
Navidson's troubles may not have created the house, but they did ultimately shape the way he faced it.
After Navidson discovers the aberrations in his house, the extra doorway, the measurement mismatch, the door to the hallway, he first pushes it away. He moved to this house to spend time with his wife and kids after all. Chasing something else will harm these relationships. Eventually, however, his artistic needs pull him away from a material reality. He is a documentarian at heart, and this is the strangest thing that has ever been captured on camera. His past experiences, his need to prove himself, and his aversion to safety in his life all push him into this hallway where he almost dies. Travis Miller has built the three-sided tape over years and years. The earliest track is from 1999, and the most recent, 2012. This whole project feels like a dive into his psyche. When I say that Miller made a record a day, I'm sure both of us can hear that and assume he was not in a real good headspace. Creating a record every single day takes up your entire life. I've attempted it a few times, and each time it took my entire day. There's no doubt in my mind for this project to be so huge, for him to have explored everything. There must have been some sacrifices. This project is informed by the way that Miller thinks. A lot of it is off the dome, and a lot of it is informed by Miller's experiences. Travis Miller, for whatever reason, decided to keep these tracks vaulted before releasing them to the public. The first two parts were released August 7th and 11th of 2013, mere weeks before Undoing and Evil Deed Blues. These sides are the beginning of the end for Lil Ugly Mane. The intro cut, Nasty Awful Rappers, sounds like an evil doom track, and its transition into the bubbly hello hits you with an immediate whiplash. This feels like the perfect introduction for the record. After just hearing his horrorcore bangers, it lets us know that we aren't here for the silly 3/6 production, but instead an album consisting of largely instrumentals and genres outside of traditional hip-hop. The repetition of Miller's instrumental loops are often mitigated by the shortness. Both of the first tracks are less than a minute long. The third track, Steel Spittin', follows the same path, interpolating a Cocoa Bros cut. In it, Miller reaffirms his work ethic, his production, and his lifestyle. This record fawns over art as a process. It wonders at hip-hop production, at lo-fi screamo, at the clean sound of an acoustic guitar. He preaches the power of art and what you can do after putting in the work. Check. Steel Spittin' is a little longer at 2 minutes 32 and marks the turn from an unnerving hallway into the endless empty rooms for Miller to explore. Bath Time is a lo-fi piece bordering on Muzak. It sounds like an elevator to nowhere with soft sax and cloudy vocals, ending with a high drone and an unnerving sample. Bath Time is followed by Cat Peel, a bombastic southern instrumental with strange synths and classic horns and constantly looping vocals that transition beautifully into Forever I Be Stangin', a Lil Ugly Mane track that would be right at home in Mista Thug Isolation. This is as good a time as any to talk about Miller's pen. His rhymes are witty, complex, and smooth, but often feel distant from himself. The Lil Ugly Mane of Mista Thug doesn't seem comfortable in this persona. His bars feel the most in-depth when talking on mental health and his feelings about creating art. Everything else feels like an exercise in duplicating rappers he admired. Looking back on Mista Thug Isolation after Miller's later releases is like listening to Earl Sweatshirt's Kitchen Cutlery after hearing some rap songs. So much talent is expressed in Mista Thug, but even more is held back. Miller feels like he's dicking around, and when he takes everything seriously like the later Oblivion Access, everything aligns into greatness. The next track, Can Sex Me, is a basic jungle beat with the strangest vocal samples of all time. This is where the tape starts to get hard to listen to. We follow Miller's creative process and listen to the tracks he for some reason or another thought he shouldn't release. While some cuts like the now moved headboard are masterpieces, others feel like a rough sketch. The next two tracks, Iron Door and Psycho for That Ass, are two more moody beat concepts. While Iron Door is 2 minutes 17 with verses and choruses, Psycho is just a bare bones loop that fades out like a track off of Gorillaz' The Fall. The next track, Radio, is a skit where Lil Ugly Mane talks to a host about his mixtape Playa's Circle, with a smooth transition into Radiation, an earlier cut of the track of the same name on Mista Thug. The track following this is an a cappella of a distorted Miller, where we start to see the themes that will arise in this and Miller's future projects. Miller rails on the concept of rapping for money, assuring the listener that he does it for the love of it. He also brings up his feelings of powerlessness, isolation, and suicidal tendencies. This track sounds like Miller breaking down, letting everything out with bar after bar. This unnamed track is a point of no return, a look into the dark heart of Navidson's house.
Resistance to representation, however, is not the only difficulty posed by those replicating chambers and corridors. The whole house defies any normal means of determining direction.
During his initial explorations of the house, Navidson finds that it defies any form of understanding. It moves constantly. Pages and pages of the book are dedicated to the idea of a labyrinth. Its smooth black walls and the lack of light give it both a cramped and endless atmosphere, alongside being hard to traverse. Understanding where you are and how to get home becomes increasingly difficult with every step taken. In 2015, Travis Miller released Oblivion Access, what I see as a tighter, more streamlined, and put-together version of the three-sided tape. Seeing Miller's work from this angle really shows us how big of a task dissecting the three-sided tape is. Just how much the walls move. Just how impossible this tape is. The record opens with ejaculated poisoned wrench, some of the harshest noise I've ever heard on a Travis Miller track, stretching to a tight but unending 2 minutes and 5 seconds. The next track, Columns, is an exercise in apathy and dissociation. Miller rails on politics, on the meaninglessness and smallness of the earth. He speaks on his powerlessness under social systems and their powerlessness under a fictitious god or the inevitable heat death of the universe. All of this is spit over a flowy, reverb-filled beat, metal clanging acting as drums. Grave Within a Grave follows similar patterns. Miller takes the place of a buried corpse who can still think and feel, wondering if he is in a material reality or a figment of his dying imagination. He's truly alone, reaching out to some celestial being to save him. Opposite Lanes is the closest you get to a fun track on Oblivion Access. Miller spits on his recklessness and carelessness when it comes to his own safety. Miller constantly talks about his substance use with multiple references in each track. Achilles' Foot is a great example, with Miller speaking at the end about taking pills of which nobody knows the source. Collapse and Appear carries with it more instances of dissociation and trauma. Miller talks about his brother's death and what I can only read as his father's departure. It ends with a long spoken word stretch of Siri, I believe, explaining Miller's belief that he is beyond saving. He has fallen apart and his mind went with. Leonard's Lake is an instrumental break, allowing you to sit in the themes Miller has brought up for nearly 4 minutes. Warmest Flag comes after, preparing the listener yet again with a repetitive and dark noise cut. In Persistence, Miller interacts with an excited fan, asking him questions that he can only answer with apathy. Miller talks about losing empathy and taking even more substances. Drain Counter is a visit back to Miller as a child, still facing the same problems he is now, but with a newer and less jaded mindset. This track gives me hope for the character Miller plays in this record. While we can see the beginnings of his current antisocial attitude, he was once excited about the world, and with time, he can heal. Slugs returns to the world we were living in prior to the break. After a short noise cut, the final track, Intent and Purulent Discharge, is the real crux of why we need to talk about this record. Miller rails on reviewers, on fans, on those looking for a deeper meaning. He talks about how everyone digs too deep into art, and how sometimes he just writes a bar because it sounds nice. His anger is palpable, and his rhymes are sharp as always, but against his wishes, I felt like I needed to dig deeper.
For exploration number 1, Holloway, Jed, and Wax enter the hallway equipped with high 8s, down parkas, hats, Gore-Tex gloves, powerful halogen lamps, extra batteries, and a radio to keep in contact with Navidson, Tom, and Reston.
After nearly getting lost forever in his first venture into the house, Navidson gets outside help in the form of experienced adventurers who understand, as well as anyone in these circumstances, how to keep themselves safe. This gives us both more understanding and more conflict, as adding other viewpoints can muddy the waters, but it can also help discover even more. Roland Barthes' 1967 essay, Death of the Author, has been mulled over endlessly on this platform. I'll put a few resources below the bibliography if you're interested, but the long and the short of it is that it's an argument to give up an artist's intention, replacing it with what you get out of it. Stuart Hall's admittedly hard-to-read Encoding Decoding provides a little bit of detail on how we communicate, and how projects with seemingly no deeper meaning can have much bigger outputs than intended. This theory is one for all communication that explains how we talk to each other and why we get things mixed up. We package our intentions up using our past experiences and what we feel is common knowledge. Then, the person getting it unpacks the message with their own knowledge and experience. This can create a rift in communication. For example, if I sniff some cheese, I package the feeling and the smell and tell you the cheese smells bad. You then unpack it with your experience. I may think of aged cheese when I package the feeling, but you, receiving it, may think it's moldy. When we extrapolate this to art, that's how we get these deep misunderstandings between the intended packaged idea and how audiences perceive it. The Dead Kennedys had to put their satire shtick down in '81 after attracting an audience of neo-Nazis who just didn't get it. Bad boy media like Berserk, Taxi Driver, and Joker have all cultivated audiences who wish to be these deeply antisocial characters. When creating mass media, people can interpret your art in any way they please, even if it goes against your wishes. This is why it's so important to stay vigilant and keep your audiences safe, as right-wing freaks just love inserting themselves into places they shouldn't be. Artists can always insist that there's a certain meaning in their art, or there is nothing, but the decoding step still needs to happen. That being said, I want to walk this tightrope with the three-sided tape, because putting words in someone's mouth isn't effective either. Most of what I say in this video is my own takeaway, and Miller has barely talked about this record. The internet is so full of people assuming they know what everyone's track means, and that feels like a lot of what Miller rhymes about at the end of Oblivion Access. We saw this on the largest scale with the Kendrick and Drake beef, where people made careers overnight with lazy, rushed, and strange dissections, down to how many fucking times Drake says the N-word. The vibe Travis Miller creates on the three-sided tape is one of creative freedom, of a love of art, and a slow disillusionment with the creation of the music that made him popular. As the record goes on, especially on the third volume, we will watch him violently throw his popular creations out. Back in the middle of the first volume, we hear Bedtime, a soft electric piano track that follows the previous untitled track. This is a short respite from the barrage of emotion and bars. It's followed by the classic, if not formulaic, Jesus piece and Ethics. The found tape samples are fantastic pieces from a thrifted cassette. The whole thing is up on Bandcamp if you just dig a little. The tracks 17 to 19 are pretty bare bones, unused beats that showcase a glut of talent from Miller. Track 20, Vudmerk, is a lo-fi heavy metal track Miller produced for his project of the same name. It's honestly hard to listen to, with the drums piercing your ear like a rusty nail. His screams are incredible, if a bit buried by the wall of loud. And this is the first real change in genre we've seen so far. Miller so far has slowly led us into his creative process by way of tracks he never thought to release until now. Tracks Cut and Down offer more of the same unfinished instrumentals, which now feel like easy listening compared to the grime of Vudmerk. A fascinating part of the tape series is Miller's use of found recordings, often at the beginning or end of many tracks. It feels like we have picked up a cassette of some homemade music and Zoom recorded it ourselves.
City Nights Fox Blues.
This gives us a great look into Miller's lower speed guitar music he'd released nearly a decade later, and Rip is a strange sigil to Biggie and Tupac, only bested by those little plots of the metaverse. Most of the rest of the first volume are more cut instrumentals, used ones, or even an alternate version of No Slack in My Mac off of Mista Thug Isolation that fits right in with this strange universe. The first record ends with track 32, Replica Fireplace, a soothing faux-end guitar cut to a journey just begun.
On the morning of the fourth day, the three men agreed to explore a new series of rooms.
During their exploration of the house, Navidson's team finds the house moving. The staircase to nothing goes from just a few feet to miles and miles into the earth. The cold and the dark envelops them as they slowly succumb to the feeling of the rooms. Strange noises mark either a creature or the house moving, resettling into a new space. Both options carry death with them. Lil Ugly Mane's three-sided tape is purposefully obtuse. While I'm using the streaming version, the Bandcamp edition, released years before streaming, consists of large tracks. The titles are listed in the description, but it's more than easy to get lost. In short, the house moves. Three-sided tape volume 2 opens with a 10-second noise cut titled 2007, full of blown-out drums and high-pitched whine right into another sample from the found tape. The second record, theoretically an extension of the first one, feels off. The 5 tracks between the found tape intro and the found tape interlude are full of half-baked beats ranging from full-produced verses to a 10-second loop. After the interlude comes Radio A Set Trip, a seemingly fully produced track right at home with Milla's Play His Circle era. Clueless is a strange and noisy dance cut full of complex and strange samples, followed by another beat with givens. Miller's production and beat choice throughout this project is amazing. His samples are deep and impeccably used, especially when it comes to vocals, and his drums are always hard-hitting and groovy. Victory Lap opens with a stream followed by a quarter-inch buzz before a normal-ass upbeat track. Even the formulaic cuts are slowly turning into rotten version of themselves. Spooky Movie original soundtrack and Go Away offer more silly horrorcore beats before a track that wouldn't be unsettling if not smashed into this rotten oak of a project. Rose's customer service helps a customer is a distorted call to a store's front desk. The loud distortion on the employee's initial speech immediately shot thoughts into my head of a 911 call, putting me right on edge. Nothing happens in the track. It's a 46-second snippet of Miller asking about spray bottles, but the sound design is perfect. Later on, track 20, Cellar Ascent, offers strange, pulsing synthesizers that worm their way into your mind. Compliments in a Graveyard is another classic beat with an extended noise intro. To get back to each beat, you're forced to listen to longer and stranger interludes. Finding morsels of Mista Thug Isolation becomes harder and harder as darkness creeps in and the temperature drops. The tracks are becoming actively hostile, and we start to hear more and more nihilistic bars and samples. The last track repeats the word misery over and over again before leaving 15 seconds of silence. This is where the tape ended, being left behind for 2 whole years.
Enough is enough. They are tired and more than a little concerned. Their bodies ache from the constant cold. Their nerves have been eviscerated by the constant darkness. They are low on battery power.
Check. Deep into their exploration of the house, Navidson's team grow tired. They argue about heading back, about the next steps forward, and about their dwindling supplies. One member, Holloway Roberts, is taken by his hubris, wanting to press on while the others wish to turn back. Holloway chases what he perceives as a monster while the other 2 flee. Holloway eventually shoots one of the explorers, believing him to be the creature he's been chasing. The shifting hallways, the unending exploration, the masculinity that needs to be portrayed is what dooms the explorers. Navidson eventually goes in himself in order to save the hurt explorer, getting more lost than anyone else in the maze. Navidson, alone, ventures further into the house than anyone. He takes a bike and rides hundreds of miles a day into the darkness. The cramped hallways turn to vast caverns. His lights don't even reach the top. Navidson has no intention of turning around as his supplies run low. Eventually, he comes across a cliff, nearly going over on his bike, and some stairs leading upwards. Navidson, with no other choice, begins to ascend. The third side of the tape is by far the longest, weighing in at 2 hours and 24 minutes. Track 1, Twin Tip, is a strange, dreamlike hip-hop cut following a recording of presumably Miller sniffing. Use, the second track, is a harsh noise cut with metallic clanging and a siren in the background, all over a low hum. Where Dem Kitty Cat's At is a devilish chopped and screwed cut, followed by Rather Be Broke, which follows Miller's disillusionment with the music industry. Grot is an indie demo in the same vein as Feeble Little Horse, if they recorded on a broken iPod in a punk house basement. Third side of tape takes the relatively little noise and distortion of the first 2 records and turns it all into a sludge. Very few tracks on the whole album can escape Miller's noisy roots. The samples show an immense amount of love and passion going into the project, while the lyricism and feeling just becomes more murky and more apathetic. Each track starts to bounce around Miller's interests. One is a classic country track complete with a fiddle, followed by a goth rock track fit for the 80s, and then pure noise. We watch throughout these records as Miller keeps a tight hour on the projects with very little play, and he flips it all on his head with strange and enthralling demos, and this is where the 3-sided tape goes from good to classic. Miller doesn't abandon hip-hop, but instead uses his talents as a producer and branches out, sometimes returning like the busted Alchemist track Can I. By this point, listeners are in it for the ride. Hours and hours of their life have been devoted to Lil Ugly Mane's experimental projects, and he keeps delivering. Miller's lyrics have turned nearly all apathetic, like the 26th track. Miller's lyrics have turned nearly all apathetic, like the 26th, like the 26th, like the 26th
into the bottom. I feel it
Miller's
rushing up at me.
Miller's
I
lyrics
have no
have turned
sense
nearly
of
all
anything
apathetic,
other
like
than
the
myself.
26th.
Navidson mumbles.
26th
I know I'm falling and will soon
26th
slam into the
trap.
bottom. I feel it rushing up at me.
Fuck off. Miller's lyrics have turned nearly all apathetic, like the 26th track. I don't know how to fucking say that. Dirt Scepter, where he raps about his recklessness and his feelings of godliness. Separate and Stay lets us sit with a heartbroken Lil Ugly Mane as he talks about the scars left by his ex-partner. Miller bombards us with noise and distortion and loud synths before finally letting us go with one last track, Cardinal.
I have no sense of anything other than myself, Navidson mumbles. I know I'm falling and will soon slam into the bottom. I feel it rushing up at me.
In his last moments in the hallway, Navidson burns copies of House of Leaves, the actual physical finished book inside of this one. With no more food, water, or light, the matches taken to the book is all that is left. Navidson burns page after page, letting it burn down to his fingers in order to keep the light for as long as possible. After the last page burns, Navidson falls for however long until he is spat out, just as we were spat out of the tape. Navidson doesn't learn a clear lesson or find a treasure. He goes through an experience, happens to make a piece of art, and is lucky enough to survive. Navidson's prior traumas encourage him to delve into this hallway, and he comes out hurt. His friends and family are all hurt, dead, or gone, and Navidson has a film to show for it. Most of the analysis of this book ignores the two other writers, Zampano and Truant, who both have fallen into this same hole. Zampano's analysis of Navidson's documentary engulfs his whole life, leading to this strange mess of a book. Tens of pages in a row are struck, only to be recovered by our second writer, Truant. Johnny Truant found all of Zampano's notes, his book written in scraps, and put them together as best he can. His own perfectionism leads to many pages of unneeded information thrown in for a sense of completion. Even as Truant's physical and mental states break down, he tries to assemble the book to smaller and smaller success. I find myself feeling like all of these characters from time to time, sitting and listening to hours of unfinished beats and attempting to explain why they are so important. I form 10-second scraps of beats, an unfinished metal track, and the sound of flex synths to try and form them into something, anything. Lil Ugly Mane's three-sided tape sounds like an exploration into themes he writes about in his later works. It sounds like a man struggling to cope with his newfound success in a genre he both cares for deeply and would like to move on from. It feels like a love letter and a death threat to music. It feels like a man diving deep into the abyss only to be spat back out with nothing to show for it.
Nothing more now than the mere dark. The tape is blank.
I gotta do the shout out. The mic is, it's interesting. Thank you to Amenwell, and thank you to Amenwell. Thank you. I need a new mic. Thank you to Amenwell and Dot for going over the script. And most importantly, Forrest Nelson, for reading those quotes. Thank you. I haven't heard them yet, but I very much hope you took them seriously. If not, it's going to change things. Thank you as always to Blake Steppen. And if you want me to get a new microphone to make this 10 times easier, share this shit. All right, that's it. Bye. See you next time. Subscribe.